Yugoslavia was born from the ashes of empires after World War I. It was, an ambitious idea, a kingdom meant to unite various South Slavic peoples. These groups included Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Bosniaks, Macedonians, and Montenegrins. Each possessed its own distinct history, culture, and often religious traditions. The country was really a mosaic of identities, a complex tapestry woven with threads of shared ancestry, but also historical differences. This inherent diversity, while a source of richness, also carried the seeds of potential friction if not managed with care and fairness for all its constituent parts, a challenge that would persist. The differences among these groups were significant and deeply rooted. Serbs, predominantly Orthodox Christians, often looked to Russia for historical and cultural ties. Croats and Slovenes, largely Catholic, had strong historical connections to Central Europe and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Bosniaks, mainly Muslim, represented a unique Islamic heritage within Europe, stemming from centuries of Ottoman rule. Macedonians and Montenegrins also had their own distinct paths and identities. These varied backgrounds meant that a unified Yugoslav identity was sometimes just a thin veneer over older, more potent loyalties, which could resurface under pressure. The experience of World War II dramatically exacerbated these underlying tensions. The Axis occupation led to the creation of a brutal puppet state in Croatia, the Independent State of Croatia, or NDH, run by the Ustasi. This regime committed horrific atrocities against Serbs, Jews, and Roma. At the same time, Serbian royalist Chetniks fought against the occupiers but also engaged in brutal campaigns against Croats and Muslims. These wartime experiences left deep scars and a legacy of profound mistrust. The memories of violence and betrayal became potent tools for future nationalist narratives, making reconciliation a difficult task for generations. Therefore, the Yugoslavia that emerged after 1945 was built upon a foundation marked by historical grievances and competing national narratives. While the idea of South Slav unity had its proponents, the brutal realities of the recent past, coupled with older historical divisions, meant that any sense of shared national feeling was fragile. The challenge for any post-war leader would be to suppress these divisive memories, or to find a way to genuinely transcend them. Without such careful management, the old fault lines were always at risk of reopening, threatening the very existence of the state itself, a precarious balance indeed. Josip Broz Tito emerged from World War II as a formidable figure. He was the leader of the partisans, the most effective resistance movement in occupied Europe. His communist forces liberated Yugoslavia with minimal Soviet help. This allowed Tito to establish a socialist state independent of Moscow's direct control. He became the country's undisputed leader, a symbol of unity and resistance. His slogan, "Brotherhood and Unity," was relentlessly promoted. It aimed to suppress the nationalist sentiments that had torn the country apart during the war. Tito's strong leadership was central to holding the diverse federation together. Tito maintained Yugoslavia's unity through a combination of charisma, a strong centralized state, and the suppression of dissent. The League of Communists was the only permitted political party. Any expression of strong nationalism from individual ethnic groups was quickly and often harshly dealt with. He skillfully played the different republics off against each other to maintain federal control. Furthermore, Tito cultivated a unique foreign policy of non-alignment during the Cold War. This stance gave Yugoslavia international prestige and access to aid from both East and West. This delicate balancing act, both internal and external, defined his long rule. However, Tito's death in May 1980 marked a critical turning point for Yugoslavia. The intricate system of personal authority he had built began to unravel almost immediately. To prevent any single republic or leader from dominating, a complex system of a rotating presidency was implemented. This collective leadership proved to be weak and indecisive. It struggled to address the mounting problems facing the country. Without Tito's overarching presence, the centrifugal forces of regional interests and historical grievances started to pull the federation apart, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The 1980s saw a severe economic crisis grip Yugoslavia. The country had accumulated substantial foreign debt during the 1970s to fuel its development. Rising oil prices and global recession hit hard, inflation soared, living standards plummeted, and unemployment grew, especially among the young. This economic hardship created widespread discontent. It eroded public faith in the federal government's ability to manage the country. The economic woes provided fertile ground for nationalist politicians. they began to blame other republics for the economic problems, further stoking inter-ethnic tensions and setting the stage for future conflict. In the late 1980s, Slobodan Milosevic rose to prominence in Serbia. He skillfully manipulated Serbian nationalism, presenting Serbs as victims within Yugoslavia. He particularly focused on the alleged mistreatment of Serbs in the autonomous province of Kosovo, which had an Albanian majority. His fiery speeches and populist appeal resonated with many Serbs who felt their status had been diminished. Milosevic consolidated power by centralizing control over Serbia's provinces, including Kosovo and Vojvodina. This assertive Serbian nationalism alarmed other republics, who feared a Serb-dominated Yugoslavia, and began to consider their own paths. The rise of Serbian nationalism triggered a corresponding surge in nationalist sentiment in other republics. In Croatia, Franjo Tudman, a historian and former general, emerged as a powerful nationalist leader. He advocated for greater Croatian sovereignty and, eventually, independence. Similar movements gained traction in Slovenia, which was economically the most prosperous republic and resented subsidizing poorer regions. These leaders argued that their republics would fare better outside the Yugoslav Federation. The dream of brotherhood and unity was rapidly fading, replaced by competing national aspirations and deepening mistrust between the ethnic groups. The year 1990 saw the first multi-party elections held in the republics. Nationalist parties swept to power in most of them, including Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia. This fundamentally changed the political landscape. In June 1991, Slovenia and Croatia declared their independence from Yugoslavia. The Yugoslav People's Army, increasingly dominated by Serbs, intervened. The war in Slovenia was brief, lasting only 10 days, as the army faced united Slovenian resistance and had limited strategic interests there. However, this short conflict was a clear signal. The breakup would not be peaceful everywhere. The situation in Croatia escalated into a much larger and more brutal war. A significant Serb minority lived in Croatia, particularly in the Krajina region. Fearing persecution in an independent Croatia and encouraged by Milosevic, these Serbs declared their own autonomous regions. Heavy fighting erupted between Croatian forces and Serb militias, supported by the Yugoslav People's Army. The war was characterized by sieges, destruction of cities like Vukovar, and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. The international community was slow to react effectively, initially favoring the preservation of Yugoslavia before gradually accepting its demise. Following Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina's path to independence proved even more perilous. Bosnia was the most ethnically diverse republic, with significant populations of Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats. In March 1992, after a referendum boycotted by most Bosnian Serbs, Bosnia declared independence. This immediately triggered a devastating war. Bosnian Serb forces, backed by Milosevic and the Yugoslav People's Army, laid siege to Sarajevo and began a campaign of ethnic cleansing to create ethnically pure Serb territories. Bosnian Croats also sought to carve out their own areas, sometimes fighting Bosniaks and sometimes Serbs. The Bosnian War, lasting from 1992 to 1995, was the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II. It was marked by widespread atrocities, including mass killings, concentration camps, and systematic rape. The siege of Sarajevo lasted for nearly 4 years, subjecting its citizens to constant shelling and sniper fire. The Srebrenica massacre in July 1995, where Bosnian Serb forces killed over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys, became a symbol of the war's horror and the failure of international protection. The conflict exposed deep divisions within the international community on how to respond to such brutality. International involvement in the Bosnian War was initially hesitant and often ineffective. United Nations peacekeepers were deployed but had limited mandates and were often unable to prevent atrocities. It was only after events like the Srebrenica massacre and renewed Serb attacks on United Nations safe areas that NATO launched significant airstrikes against Bosnian Serb positions in 1995. This military pressure, combined with diplomatic efforts led by the United States, eventually forced the warring parties to the negotiating table. The Dayton Agreement, signed in November 1995, ended the war and divided Bosnia into two entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska. The final act in Yugoslavia's violent dissolution played out in Kosovo in the late 1990s. Kosovo, predominantly Albanian, had its autonomy revoked by Milosevic in 1989. Years of peaceful resistance gave way to armed conflict as the Kosovo Liberation Army emerged. Serbian forces responded with brutal repression. In 1999, after failed diplomatic efforts, NATO launched a 78-day bombing campaign against Serbia to halt the ethnic cleansing of Albanians in Kosovo. This led to Serbian withdrawal and United Nations administration of Kosovo, which eventually declared independence in 2008. Yugoslavia, by then reduced to Serbia and Montenegro, formally dissolved in 2006. The collapse was, honestly, a tragic confluence of deep-seated historical animosities, economic decline, the rise of cynical nationalist leaders, and a complex, often delayed, international response.